We are live with Eliza Orlins, who is a career public defender for 15 years and has been covering the surveillance methods and mechanisms and tools that ICE has been using. You know, Eliza, I'm really glad. Glad sounds weird because it's such a horrible thing, but I'm glad to be able to talk to you about this in the sense that I think a lot of people have no idea that this is even going on. So maybe first just sort of lay it out. When we talk about ICE surveillance, what's going on generally?
Well, David, I'm thrilled that we're having this conversation because as horrible of a topic as this is, like it genuinely couldn't be more imperative that folks understand what is going on and how they can protect themselves. I think that mass surveillance has been going on for a very long time, but the ways in which it is getting more and more nefarious is deeply alarming. And so everyone should be aware of this big dragnet that they've created and the ways in which they're funding it so that they can keep eyes on every single thing that you do in your life, essentially.
Now, talk a little bit about the tools and techniques that are used, but also a lot of people in the audience might be thinking, well, I was born in the United States and that's it. I have nothing to do with ICE's goals, priorities, whatever. What about those people and why is this still a concern for them, which I assume is the vast majority of the audience?
Yeah, listen, I think that a lot of folks think about being surveilled. And I know this, I quite literally gave a TED talk earlier this year on unlawful surveillance and the erosion of the Fourth Amendment. And people say, but I didn't commit a crime or I'm a US citizen. What does it matter that they have access to my location data? What does it matter that, that my DMV records or the tolls that I pay or, that I'm being pinged on my cell site location? Why does that matter? Well, it matters because as we've seen with Trump's executive orders, anyone who is considered Antifa could be placed on a list, could be criminalized, could be at some point rounded up, prosecuted, jailed. We don't know at this point. So everyone should be thinking about the ways in which they can protect themselves and protect their neighbors, because we all have people in our lives who we love, who are non-citizens, who are green card holders, who are visa holders, who are DACA recipients. I mean, guaranteed every single person we on this live, every single person watching this knows and loves someone who is less safe than they are.
So give us the list of the databases, platforms, data sets, et cetera, that are in play for ICE here.
Well, so it is a massive surveillance network. I mean, and it doesn't just encompass the things that would be top of mind, which is why I tell folks often, if you're going to a protest, the best thing you can do is leave your phone at home. And that is the number one safest thing you can do, because anytime you open an app that you have given location permissions to, that app is tracking you at that location. So anything as little as opening the weather app on your phone is tracking your location. So it's extremely simple. And I see folks in the comments saying you could use a Faraday bag, but those are not fail safe. It's not, the safest thing you can do is not bring your cellular phone, especially a smartphone, to any location where you could be tracked. But furthermore, there are these databases, these commercial databases, and now this is how they're circumventing needing warrants or needing any type of probable cause or reasonable suspicion to infringe on your rights. But they are quite literally buying up these commercial databases and receiving your phone number, your email address, your family's location. They're pulling up your driver's license, your water bill, your phone records. It's all part of this massive surveillance network, even if you've done nothing wrong. And unlike other agencies, there's almost no transparency or accountability when it comes to ICE.
Is it mostly after the fact looking at records of where you've been, or does this delve into real-time surveillance as well?
Well, so what they are doing, or at least what has been announced, is that they are going to be massively funding real-time surveillance. So they're going to have these kind of centers where folks are there. And if they have high interest targets, they will be in real time tracking their social media, tracking them, trying to see where they are. They have license plate readers. If you go through any, in New York to pay tolls, they have cameras that click your license plate as you go through, Easy Pass, whatever, and so folks are getting tracked in real time. And they are building out this infrastructure to like really surveil people and track them in the moment.
So I want to get to what can be done with this data, but I first kind of want to get your take as an attorney on whether this is legal in the sense of, is it a form of warrantless surveillance?
Absolutely. It definitely is. And listen, it's not the first time. It's not, when post 9/11, as you and I remember, the FISA courts, like basically the warrants that were issued were rubber stamped. I think not a single one of the however many tens of thousands that were requested was ever rejected. And so they were able to do this kind of surveillance even if the warrant was just for show. And now in a lot of ways those warrants are not even required. I think so much of what we think of, like the way in which the Fourth Amendment was written to prevent us from unlawful searches and seizures, was to protect us from physical searches. Because when it was written, it was like, oh, you think about, oh, are they going to search my person, my pockets, my purse, my car, my home? Those physical searches of like being patted down on the street or having your vehicle or your home searched, of course they require, that's an intrusion. But these digital searches that are so much more invisible, it's much harder to have that ability to like see that it's happening. And because there's so little transparency, and because of these like horrible data brokers who kind of like buy up this information, they've kind of found a way to circumvent these procedures that are in place to protect our constitutional rights. And so they're able to do these warrantless searches.
So needless to say, it's happening. I guess the next thing will be, some people are probably, and I even saw in the comments, why would I want to hide that I'm going to a protest? It's legal to go to the protest. I'm not committing a crime. I'm not doing anything wrong.
Absolutely.
What are the ways that this can be weaponized? Like, what is it people should be fearful of?
So I think that, for the folks who've read history books, that it's like everyone has heard they came for the X. And whenever there's a certain group that is first targeted, which in this case, we're talking about immigrants, unlawful, whatever they call them, illegal immigrants, people who have come in without inspection or who are currently undocumented. And that has always throughout history been a stepping stone to head to other people next. Next up is journalists who cover this administration in a way they don't like. Next up is dissenters and protesters and people who speak out against this administration. Like, David, you and I we're on lists already. We're going to be, we're going to be like not the first group or the second group, but like we're going to be rounded up if they start coming for people who are out there using our platforms to speak out against this administration. And I think that when we see them normalizing this stuff and militarizing and terrorizing communities, we should all be afraid because they are going to repurpose this to come after dissenters and anyone who is protesting.
Now, there's a couple of ways that could go, and I know we're thinking ahead a couple of steps here. Sometimes the annoyance, and it's more than annoyance, but sometimes just the threat of is the punishment in and of itself, especially in cases where you're not really committing a crime. And so that could be one path. The other path, of course, is overcriminalization, either with the interpretation of existing law to apply it to activities that previously were thought of as legal, or the creation of new law. Trump talks about, I want there to be jail time for burning a flag. And we go, well, that's not the law right now. But what if the law were changed to make that a crime? Which of those two paths, the just burying you in having to get a lawyer and blah, 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 even if ultimately you're not really going to be charged or certainly not convicted, or the second path of actually criminalizing some of this behavior, which seems more likely?
I think that it all kind of plays into um, this culture of power and fear and intimidation. And I think, the idea is for folks to comply in advance, to be afraid to speak out, to be afraid to go to protests. And I personally, they will have to drag me away kicking and screaming, because I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to stop going to protests. I'm not going to stop speaking out. But I also recognize the level of privilege I have, both as a white woman, a US citizen, an attorney. I have a lot of things that for me, I have already decided that this is a thing that I'm going to do. But for some folks, the fear will prevent them from reporting crimes if they are the victim of crimes. It will prevent them from seeking medical care or health care if they are sick or need help. It will prevent them from accessing education. We've already seen people too afraid to go to school, and there being big absences. So it chills communities in that way. But then also, I think, the way that this enables the administration to come after people and prosecute them, and let's say, this flag burning thing. Of course it's still legal to burn a flag, but his order is written in such a way that it's okay, but even if it's legal to burn a flag, the way that they arrested the veteran who burned the flag in Lafayette Park was by saying having an open flame in a city park. And then they're going to say, oh, no, it was disorderly conduct. It was obstruction of governmental administration. The amount of times I've, in my career, seen cops charge someone with OGA, we call it, obstruction of governmental administration. It's when you don't have a crime to charge someone with, you charge them with OGA, disorderly conduct, and then resisting arrest, because they're like, what am I being arrested for? And then they're resisting. So it's this fits into a broader authoritarian infrastructure.
One of the things about the protests this weekend that seems maybe a little different than the first No Kings protests is that I think the administration suspects turnout is going to be huge. And we have this 3.5% idea, that when 3.5% of a population mobilizes and activates, in the US, it would be about 12 million people, that historically that has been associated with change, with the driving and pushing change. We didn't get 12 million at the first ones, and I don't know that we're going to get to 12 this Saturday, but certainly the potential for a larger turnout is there. And so Trump has been saying, I hear it's going to be very small. Sean Hannity said last night on his show, just for your own safety, probably stay away from this and stay home. Scott Bessent has said this is going to be like a far left hardcore thing. I don't think people should be associated with it. That's at the top level, what the politicos are saying.
Right.
At the protests, taking into account all of the things that have been going on and that you've seen in your career, what tactically should people who plan to attend sort of be cognizant of and maybe think about doing other than leave the phone at home, which you mentioned already?
Listen, I think that protecting yourself and your neighbors means, just if you do bring your phone because you decide you want to, listen, I'll have my phone with me, but don't post pictures of other people's faces because, you don't want to endanger anyone else. I would say be aware that they want to do anything they can to undermine these protests, and they want to paint us as violent rioters, radicals, the capital R, capital L, radical left. And so don't engage if people are trying to agitate, because I think that inevitably there will be agitators who try to infiltrate. And the first No Kings was incredibly peaceful. I mean, we had millions of people out on the streets of New York City, and I don't even think a single arrest was made. I mean, it really was so peaceful. And so I would just say, don't engage with agitators. I know that a bunch of us are planning on like wearing inflatables because like they're trying to paint us as that. And I think that like combating it with humor, the folks who are going to show up in like their inflatable frog costumes and their inflatable aliens and chickens and everything else, it's really like it's showing like you can't psychologically intimidate us out of showing up and supporting our communities and showing how we are not okay with this.
One of the things that I just don't know how common it's been in history, but that we saw in Chicago is that the federal presence of law enforcement was antagonizing, not necessarily on purpose, but like, for example, with the tear gas, they ended up antagonizing not only protesters, but local PD as well. And I'm not suggesting that local PD was, quote, on the side of the protesters or anything like that. But there was this tension where when a mayor says, we don't want you here, and when a governor says, we don't want you here, and you end up, I guess we could say, accidentally sort of smoking out local PD, that's a tension that I don't really remember in the United States, certainly for as long as I've been doing this. Is that unique to what's going on right now in some of these scenarios?
Definitely, because I think that it would be very, I mean, listen, I can't really picture that happening here. I don't, I can't speak for other cities, but I know in New York, the NYPD, um, who largely come in and police a city in which they don't live, who come in from Nassau County, Suffolk County, and Staten Island, are themselves very pro Trump. And so it would be hard to imagine them standing up on behalf of protesters against if he brought in, say, federal forces, National Guard or whatever. But I do think it is very interesting to see how Chicago has reacted. I've been wildly impressed by JB Pritzker and, all the folks in Chicago and Illinois who have really stood up and said, nope, not in our city, not in our state.
It's often said that using federal agencies to do domestic law enforcement violates the Posse Comitatus Act. What I'm curious about is, like, one of the things we've learned in this administration is just because you can point to something being against the law, there's sort of a question as to, like, okay, well, how do you enforce that? If someone wanted to bring a case that what Trump is doing by sending these federal troops in is flatly against the law because of Posse Comitatus, what is the venue for pursuing such a claim? Who has standing to pursue such a claim? Like, what would it look like to actually explore that?
I think that the big issue that we see and like the fact that so many people say, oh, but this thing is against the law. He can't do that. He can't do that. Okay, but he's doing it. Like,
Right.
does it matter? And like, is anyone going to stop him? And I mean, just yesterday I was listening to oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court around the Louisiana Voting Rights Act gerrymandering case. And it looks as though the conservative justices are going to gut the rest of the Voting Rights Act. I mean, it is just, I mean, it's fucking devastating, but it's what's happening right now. So even if laws are on the books that we think protect us, protect our civil rights, protect our, civil liberties, um, we are devolving into extreme authoritarianism. And so laws don't matter as much as they used to. I love that you cited the 3.5%. Like Dr. Erica Chenoweth's research really gives me a lot of hope. And I think that, knowing that since, what does she say, since the night, like 1900 or since that any time 3.5% of the population has engaged in sustained nonviolent resistance, they've never failed to defeat authoritarianism. So that is what I'm hoping for. And that's why I hope we see, at least 10 million people out there on Saturday.
Now, to go back to that legal question, who could bring a complaint about violation of Posse Comitatus?
I guess in theory, who's the aggrieved party? It would, I guess, be
Would it be the cities?
I guess. But I don't know enough. Honestly, I would have to like look up um like that would what that would entail in terms of like how like I mean obviously like the act I know like limits the federal government's ability to militarize, domestic law enforcement, but I think like how it would be used or like how it could be brought in court is something that is not 100% clear to me.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, and I think that that's what sometimes, when we say, but that's against the law,
I
you do
know.
get into these questions of, okay, and then so then now what? What is the kind of the next the next step in that? Going briefly back to the protests, the surveillance, and so on and so forth. Anything else that is important for people who plan to participate to do? Obviously, we've talked about consider leaving your phone at home, remain peaceful, don't allow yourself to be baited. There may be agent provocateur, etc. Anything else that's important to keep in mind for people who plan to be out there?
So listen, what I always tell folks, and I think this is good advice across the board forever and ever, is don't talk to the cops.
Hmm.
The law enforcement is not there to help you. They are not your friends. If they are questioning you, you say, "Am I free to leave?" If you are free to leave, leave. If you are not free to leave, say, "I cannot speak to you without my lawyer present. I do not want to talk to you without my lawyer present. I will not speak to you." You have the right to remain silent. You need to use it. No one has ever talked their way out of being arrested. No one has ever talked their way out of being, prosecuted. Like you think that you will be able to help yourself, but you won't. Just don't say anything. If they've made a decision to arrest you, then just please, please, please use your right to remain silent.
I was talking to some people recently about the protests and these in general, who the Saturday protests and protests in general. And they sort of had like the group had mixed opinions about the idea of bringing kids. And, on the one hand, there's this thing of, hey, uh, the future will impact kids. Kids are part of my family. I want them to understand what we're doing. I want them to be involved. And then on the other hand, am I exposing kids to unnecessary whatever, not just in terms of like, some of these interactions that we're talking about with law enforcement or danger or whatever? Do you have an opinion about that? Is it really just subject to personal preference and parents?
Listen, I would not purport to tell anyone how to raise their children or how to parent. I definitely was involved in politics at a very young age, was exposed to this stuff, but look how I turned out. So, that's a thing that other people should decide. But I think that for the most part, these protests have been incredibly peaceful, and having pictures of your kid with a sign and being able to show your grandkids and be like, you were there and I was there, and like, look at me, I was little and I was there, and like having that I think is really, really special. And like most of this is like in the middle of the day on a Saturday. Like this is going to be 11 a.m. in Times Square. Like, I assume I will see a lot of kids out there. I saw a lot of kids out there the last time, and I
Yeah.
presume I will see a lot of kids out there this time. There will be people in costumes. There's a lot of, I think, this is a much more joyful than you would expect given the severity of what we are all experiencing. I think like joy as an act of resistance, like last time there was music and dancing and, people will be in costumes and signs and everything. And so I think that for the most part, it's a safe atmosphere for children, but I think it's an individual decision and everyone knows what's right for their family.
Yeah, I saw a lot of kids at the last one, and given the dark nature of what's going on, it is interesting that the vibe was certainly very, very positive. We have been speaking with Eliza Orlins, 15-year public defender. Really appreciate your insights following the surveillance stuff, and we definitely want to catch up again.
Absolutely, definitely. And thanks for chatting about this stuff. It's really so critical, and appreciate all that you do.
All right, thanks. Likewise, Eliza. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye.